Our next presenter will be Stephanie Lamb. She's an avian practitioner, and today she will be talking about enrichment for breeding facilities and young birds.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks everybody for attending today. So I'm going to be talking about enrichment, more specifically to breeding birds, to young birds. However, you're going to find that a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about really accounts for all different types of birds that we keep in captivity. So though the focus is supposed to be breeding birds, you'll see it's quite a bit more broad than that. So go ahead on to our next slide. There we go. Okay, so we've already heard a little bit in some of the other presentations today about what exactly is enrichment. And enrichment is, just as a simple definition, the action of improving or enhancing the quality or value of something. So very basic definition for that term. When we look at it more from behavioral enrichment, though, looking at it from the standpoint of animal behavior, the definition becomes a little bit more broad. And I wanted to advance, but I'm having a hard time advancing to the next slide here. Okay, there we go. So when we're talking more specifically about behavioral enrichment, the definition again becomes a little bit more long in that it's an animal husbandry principle that seeks to enhance the quality of captive animal care by identifying and providing the environmental stimuli necessary for optimal psychological and physiological well-being. Enrichment also can be active or passive, depending upon whether it requires direct contact between the animal and the enrichment that it's working with. One of the things, oh, I think I may have advanced too quickly. There we go. One of the things we have to think about, we're doing this big symposium all on enrichment. So we should question, why is it that we're talking about enrichment and why is enrichment valuable? Well, with the last definition that we talked about, we already mentioned how it allows for optimal psychological and physiological well-being, right? That was part of the definition of enrichment. So it's important just from that standpoint. We also have to think when we're talking about it specifically for birds, most of the birds that we're having in captivity, a lot of them are really social animals, and most are extremely intelligent animals as well. And so it's really important that we think about their psychological well-being. Enrichment and enriching an environment can really provide more mental and physical stimulation, which allows for the birds to express various natural behaviors that they would be doing out in the wild. And with captive environments, if you have an individual who's unable to express natural behaviors, it may actually predispose them to the development of problems. And when we're specifically talking about birds, we know that it can result sometimes in things like feather damaging behaviors or stereotypical behaviors, or possibly other physiological problems that sometimes we may not think too much about being related to having a poorly enriched environment, but may actually be related to it. Now, specifically because we're talking about birds and breeding facilities in this particular lecture, one of the things that I think historically people have been worried about is if we provide a lot of enrichment, will it interfere with birds wanting to breed? Because a bird in a breeding facility, what's the goal of that bird in a breeding facility? Well, it's to breed and produce babies, right? Or that's what our goal as humans are for those birds. So I think, and I've heard people say in the past, they're worried about providing too much enrichment sometimes because maybe then the bird's going to show more interest in engaging with something in its environment as opposed to doing what we want it to do in captivity, which is breed. But I think what we have to do is get away from that mindset and recognize that if we're doing enrichment correctly, it really wouldn't affect breeding any more than a bird being in the wild would have enrichment affect their breeding. So, the other thing that we have to recognize is that there's conservation programs that are out there. And the whole goal of avian conservation is to produce more species, right? We're trying to increase populations of birds to get them out into the wild so we can try to mitigate some of the issues that we have created in bringing birds into captive environments. So in a conservation program, the full goal is breed those birds so we get more numbers out there and replenish the populations that have been depleted. But when you go to, look at conservation programs and go out into the field and see what these people are doing, you actually find that conservation programs are providing foraging opportunities for their birds. So in this situation where we really, really, really want to produce a lot of babies, and that's our main goal, the conservation programs are still providing foraging opportunities. They're providing enrichment opportunities for birds. So they're really keeping their psychological health and welfare in mind, which is extremely important. We really should do that in every captive situation that we can. So, how can we provide enrichment? Well, I'm going to go over a variety of things, some of which have already been discussed. So you're going to have a little bit of overlap of some things, but I'm also going to hit on a couple of differences, and really with the goal of just trying to have us brainstorm a lot of ways that we can provide enrichment for these birds in captivity so that, we really have a variety of things for them to engage their minds and keep them happy. And hopefully we can all, learn from one another new techniques, new things. I know I've already learned from watching a couple of the other presentations today, some other thoughts that I hadn't thought of before. So hopefully some of these things will be new for you guys as well. But we're going to talk about how we can provide enrichment with the caging and the housing, environmental setup, toys that are provided, food items, how we present that food, geophagy, and then thinking about a little bit outside the box sometimes. Okay, this talk is really going to be focused on psittacines and passerines. I'm not going to go into all the different types of species in a breeding facility, because there's just so much variety out there. And I really wanted to have a heavy focus on psittacines and then some focus on passerines. But specifically when I'm talking about passerines, I'm really going to be talking about the little guys. So I have a picture of a little zebra finch up here. And it's really those tiny guys, those like finches, canaries, those sort of guys that I'm going to touch on. Okay, so when we're, oops. Let me go back. I went too quick there on my slide advancement. Okay, there we go. So when we're talking about the caging and the housing, as already mentioned, we want to provide a variety of perches. If you look at this picture here, this is a single bird in a home in a cage by itself, and it has a variety of different perch types for it to stand on. We have some rope type perches that are bendable and we can shape them into different ways. We have a couple of different types of natural perches. And then there's even another natural perch in the back that's like a little cholla cactus. These perches are branches from trees, but they're providing variety so that you have a different texture and shape and size that a bird can stand on for appropriate foot health, like Andrea just presented for us. We also, with our caging indoors, we want to provide various toys. And when, again, we look at this picture of this bird in its single cage environment, there's quite a variety of toys in there for the bird, but then it also has various objects to explore and forage through. Now, this is the same bird, but on different days. And so you can see there is a little bit of change in the variety of items that are presented to the bird. So it's not the same thing all the time. We're giving them different things to interact with. There's different types of foraging toys here, one that's like a little cup system that the bird has to push a little piece of plastic off the top to get food from the inside, and other little plastic foraging foraging device where they have to lift little like latches to open up a cup to get food on the inside. This is a child's toy box that has various little what people often refer to as foot toys. So things that the bird can just pick up and hold in its foot, grasp, chew on, play with, drop to the floor, move on to the next thing. When we go into the same cage but different day, we have this different type of foraging item here. It's like a balsa wood kind of material that you can actually stuff some food into, and the bird may have to kind of tear through that wood to get a little food item. But then there's also, of course, like just the regular sort of block toys that are in the back for the bird to chew on, or paper-based things, little wicker balls. So just a variety of things for that bird to interact with. Okay. Also, when we're thinking about caging and housing, I think it's important for us to think about housing outdoors if it's safe and if the weather permits. These two pictures here are two different situations. The picture up at the top here on the right-hand side, this is actually a picture from a conservation program where they are breeding great green macaws and have them in this nice cage setup where it's quite large, but it is completely outdoors. The type of caging material that's used here for these breeding birds, because they're going to be housed outdoors continuously, is pretty sturdy materials that are making sure that these birds are safe from predators. The other thing that's important if they're housing outside is we have to make sure that we're providing them with coverage from the elements, and again, protection from any predators. Knowing wherever you are, since this particular talk is available for everybody throughout the world to watch, it's going to vary based on where you are for what sort of things you need to be aware of for the birds, because there's going to be different predators in different locations, right? So knowing where you are and knowing what predators could be around, also what kind of weather is going to be around, is going to make it so that if you have outdoor housing, you're going to have a little bit of a different setup based on where you are. But this conservation setting here, these birds are, because they're 100% outdoors, their caging is very sturdy and secure. Versus this sort of situation out here, this is more in a backyard situation. So we have some cages in this backyard. The birds are exposed to the elements. There's a couple of areas with coverage. You can see sort of coverage in this corner here, and a covered sort of patio over here so that the birds can get out of the elements if they want to. But to protect them from aerial predators, there's actually some bird netting that is kind of hard to see in the photo, but you can sort of see it. It is hung up over this setup to protect those birds, again, from any sort of aerial predators, or also any other birds, wild birds, preventing them from coming in to where potentially disease could be introduced from some wild bird. So two pretty different situations, much more of a small operation versus a very large operation. And it is going to vary, but thinking about providing coverage, protection from weather, protection from predators is extremely important if we are going to be housing them outside. But, one of the benefits of housing these birds outside, the real enrichment benefit, is just exposure to the natural world and natural elements. This is a situation where we're talking about passive enrichment. If you remember when I was talking about behavioral enrichment in the beginning, we talk about active enrichment and we talk about passive enrichment. And I think a lot of times our minds really go to focusing on active enrichment. What can I give this bird for it to interact with and for it to be enriched by? But passive enrichment is really important too. On the last talk, we heard about just allowing birds to listen to different things. Well, here, when they're outside, they're listening to the sounds of nature. They may hear other birds that might be really interesting to them, or they may hear other sorts of animal sounds, or hear people talking, or just the differences in weather can be really interesting too. And some birds love rain, some birds hate rain, some birds love the wind, some birds hate it, but it's differences and it's variability that these birds are exposed to that we're not getting them exposed to when they're inside as much. And so It just provides an other component of enrichment. Of course, it's not going to be appropriate for every situation. So, I recognize that we can't have this for every bird, but if it's something that is a possibility, it's certainly something to consider. Just a few more pictures. Again, these are just more of those macaws in that conservation setting where, again, they're housed outdoors. But there are a few different types of cages, so you can kind of see that even amongst the individuals that are in this breeding facility, they're housed ever so slightly different to make it more favorable for the certain individuals. This cage here is where we have a lot more birds interacting together. These are actually young birds that were recent hatches, they're recent fledges, and so they're just learning how to interact with one another in their environment. Versus these two individuals, these are more of a breeding pair. And so they're a little bit more happy kind of being in a smaller environment, maybe not around as many individuals, but you can still see how enriched this environment is with the variety of natural perches that they have. They do have that appropriate covering because they are outside 100%. This picture also does show sort of the protection around the bottom of the facility, of the caging that the birds are in, so that they're protected from any predators that could potentially try to burrow underneath to get into the caging system. So even within the individual sort of group where we are working with these breeding birds and young birds, there might be a little bit of variability from one individual to the next. Okay, so further going into that environmental setup, inside of that caging and inside of that housing, what can we do to provide them within that housing to allow them to have some form of enrichment? So we already talked about different types of perches, but to go into those perches a little bit more specifically, there's lots of things that are available out there. So this little thing right here, this is called a boing. It has like a wire in the center, and then it's a rope perch around, and you can kind of twist it and shape it to whatever you want it to be. But it'll naturally, when you purchase it, it kind of comes as this coiled thing, and then you open it up and it kind of hangs down the way it is showing here in this image. And this is a lot of fun because the bird can come climb up on this thing, and it's not a steady perch. It kind of swings a little bit back and forth. If the bird lands on it, like flies to it and lands on it, it really swings quite a bit back and forth. But that's fun for the birds. Some of them don't like it. Some of them think that that's scary to have a perch that moves a lot. Other birds find that really enriching and seem to take a lot of joy in interacting with a perch like that, or having that as a perch that they can go onto. I also wrote atoms, but that's in another picture I'll show on the next slide. Different tree stands. This bird here, oops. Let me go back. I think I hit the wrong thing. Well, I can show this in this image right now, and I'll go back in just a second. But this perch right here, this is called an atom. Again, it is just that wire center covered by rope, but it's kind of this nice big circular thing, and it's just sort of fun for the birds to hang out on. It has a little bit more movement to it. But going more specifically into those tree stands, there's a variety of different perching setups that people have created to make these stands that are natural perches created from, natural branches that people have harvested and put together to make these tree stands that are a little bit more like what a bird would be hanging out in the wild. And using natural materials, this is actually a little perching thing that was created at that conservation center with the macaws. And you can see that you can't really see the perch so well in the center, but there's actually lots of leaves and branches and things on this for the birds to be able to perch, but then have something to hide in, or maybe to tear all those pieces of leaves apart, whatever it is that they're going to do, but it provides something a little bit different. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is I think it's important for us to also consider providing safe plants for birds to interact with our environmental setup. We have the perches, the natural perches that we talk about that provide for good foot health, that birds are holding onto. In this picture down here of this African gray in this cage, you can see this bird is on a natural perch. But what about other parts of the plant? A lot of times we just stop at the perch, but there's so much more than just that branch that they're hanging out on in the wild, right? There's other parts of that plant, little tiny branches, things that they couldn't actually perch on, leaves, flowers, different parts of that plant that they can interact with as well. And when we just have this plain, boring perch for them to stand on in captivity, that might not be too enriching for them. So providing them with other parts of the plant, safe plants to interact with, could be really great. These two pictures here actually show the birds with citrus plants. So citrus plants, like our lemon trees, orange trees, grapefruit trees, that people may have in their own backyards, because they may be growing lemons or limes or what have you. You can harvest some of these branches and put them into the environment where the bird is. Now the bird has something fun to interact with, something to tear apart if it chooses to, or maybe just something to look at. Maybe they don't care too much about the branches, but hey, it's something different. And also, you can see how if this bird climbed down to the bottom of this atom, he can actually be totally covered and hiding inside of that plant material, which is really kind of nice. You know, the birds don't always want to be exposed to everybody in the environment. And when we're talking about a lot of our breeding birds too, sometimes they need some privacy from human eyes. And so having those branches and leaves from natural safe plants can be a great way to provide them with a little area of coverage. This is just a piece of grass, like a safe grass that a bird can interact with. It was plucked from the ground, and you can see the bird just feeling all along it. He's probably not going to eat any of this. He's probably just, enjoying the texture of it, but something to interact with. This is millet from actually a bird seed mixture that fell into the ground and decided to sprout and grow. But when we provide millet to our birds in a captive setting, a lot of times we are just using the little seed part, right? But look at the whole plant. We could actually grow that, pluck that whole plant, give it to the birds for them to interact with so that they have more than just the seed to interact with. They have the whole plant item to interact with. Oh, I went too far. Let me go back. Sorry. Okay. This picture here is again in sort of that like backyard outdoor aviary situation, just trying to show how plant material can kind of provide for that coverage and protection for a bird if they want to get out of the way of humans looking at them. This plant here, these are all actually weeds, safe weeds that were plucked from a garden. If you have a home and you have a yard, you're probably having some weeds somewhere. It's something that we all have to deal with. If they're safe, you can pluck those weeds and give them to the birds to interact with. And this was a lot of weeds that were plucked and actually put on top of this cage to provide coverage for the bird. And he's not in the cage at this moment. He's climbing along on the outside, but there is actually a perch kind of hidden up there that provides a place for him to go to and be in a more quiet, secured environment that can be really nice and comforting for a bird who is, again, not wanting to be around humans so much. And when talking about breeding birds, providing them with some sort of coverage can be really nice for them. These pictures here, again, this is more for if you have birds that have an outdoor aviary situation. But if you are able to get birds into an outdoor aviary situation, growing plants in that outdoor aviary that again are safe plants for the birds could be really nice for them. If they were in the wild, they would be hanging out in trees, bushes, different environments at different points in the daytime, not always exposed to humans all the time. Having some natural plants that they can go and hide out in, as this Amazon is doing in this bush here, and this African gray is doing in this bush, can be a great way to allow them to interact with their environment in a different way, get some security, get some coverage, and then later on when they want to come out and do things, they have that option to do it. If you are, maybe in a situation where you don't have a ability for birds to be in an outdoor aviary, and for them to, or maybe even they don't have the ability to have access to the ground to where you could have some plant growing in there for them, you could consider growing stuff in a garden yourself to provide them. This bird here, she's actually climbing into a garden. This is a bunch of cilantro that's growing, just a natural or a common herb that people use. But things like cilantro or basil or parsley, things that are items that we like to grow for ourselves in like a little herb garden, you can grow that stuff for these birds and also provide it for them as an enrichment thing for them to chew up. And all the parts of this cilantro plant are safe for this bird to interact with. Okay, moving on to the next thing, toys. We always want to provide birds with a variety of toy items, different textures, different materials. You can see all these items here on this table. These are all different types of bird toys that we can provide to give them some variety, different wood blocks, different like paper-based things, little finger traps that are paper-based, some little rope things, just a variety of things, different sizes, shapes, textures. Ultimately, when we're giving toys to birds, we do need to remember that we have to be safe. We want to have these birds interacting with items that are not going to cause them any problems. So let's say you happen to have a bird who is really bad about ingesting fibrous materials. Okay, obviously that bird shouldn't be getting a toy like this. So there is individual variability that you do have to keep in mind. Variety of other types of toys are just pictured here. Some things to just sort of get you thinking outside the box. Several of these things aren't necessarily bird toys. Some of them are. This is some weird little ball that probably originally wasn't a bird toy, but was converted into a bird toy, and the bird's just having a fun time hanging upside down with it. This is one of those sort of like stereotactic sort of toys that have become more popular in recent years. They're like individual plastic pieces that link together, and it makes this fun little like wiggly sort of worm toy. And this can be a great item for a bird to interact with. They can tear it apart into the individual pieces, and you can see the bird is actually exploring with his tongue this little individual plastic piece. This is an old puzzle. It's just paper-based, it's safe. You can hide different things inside of this puzzle for the bird to kind of search through. And in the event of searching through the puzzle pieces, they can pick up the individual puzzle pieces and chew them into little bits because it is just a paper-based item. This is a human child's toy, but it's just wood, and it has been painted with safe paints for human children to chew on, so should be safe for our little birds as well. But something that again just provides a little bit of variety. This bird over here, this bird is not in a breeding situation, but this bird actually has a cerebellar problem. So it has a neurologic problem and it has a disability. It's not able to perch. But even this bird who isn't able to do some of the things that normal birds do, it's still being provided with a little fun toy that is providing a variety of interactive elements to the bird. And it's able to engage with its environment, even though it may not be able to do some of the things that other birds can do. So again, this one isn't necessarily specific to a breeding facility, but I just want to point out that even when we have birds who are different in some way, we still can provide them with enrichment opportunities. We just have to think outside the box. This is actually a toy that's a small mammal toy that just works well because it's safe wood-based, paper-based things that we just converted into using for a bird toy. Okay, with food items, again, thinking about variety. We know that we have different pellets and commercial products that we can give to birds as their main diet. We know that we want to be providing them with fresh items and varieties as well. But we can provide them with food items that maybe isn't going to be providing a ton of nutrition necessarily, but it is something for them to interact with and is a little bit different. This bird here, this is a little piece of basil. This is actually like the flowering part of a basil plant that this bird has plucked and is just chewing the little flowers from. This over here is all those weeds that I had showed in one of the pictures prior that were plucked from a garden, plopped on top of that cage. The bird is just chewing the weeds up. And again, these are safe weeds. These are ones that are okay if the bird happens to consume it. But look at the portion of the plant that the bird's actually interacting with. It's not the leafy portion, it is the stem portion that this bird is just enjoying tearing apart. It's not providing a ton of nutrition to this bird, and that wasn't the goal of this particular food item, but it is providing something different for the bird. This bird has a pine cone that it's chewing apart. This one here, this is actually a lemon. Now, most of the time we would not think about providing a lemon as a food item for this bird, but for one of our parrots. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that that be a food item, but what I am suggesting is that inner portion, like this lemon was cut in half, it was used for a human for other purposes, and then just the end piece was given to the bird for it to interact with. And you can see how the bird is engaging with this item. It's not getting, again, really much nutrition or anything from it, but it's just something different. It's getting at least a little bit of a different taste, and enjoying it from a different aspect. This is actually a mango seed. So a lot of times we think about, oh, let's give some mangoes to a parrot. And we're thinking about that fleshy, like, the fruit portion. Well, the center can be a lot of fun for them too. This seed is safe. A mango seed is safe for a parrot to eat. And this parrot has broke it open, and you can see there is no longer anything inside that seed because the bird has totally torn it apart. And then, of course, our commercial items. There are different commercial items that are out on the market that provide a little bit of different variety and texture that they can interact with as well. Different foraging toys. There's lots of commercial foraging toys available. I won't go into this so much because Andrea already talked about it a little bit. But basically, there's lots of foraging toys out there. Have variety. Give them something to hide their food in so that they are interacting with their environment in a different way. And change it up a lot, I think, is the other thing we need to remember. Don't just get one or two. Provide different ones and move them around, cycle through them. Don't use the same thing all the time. You can make homemade foraging items too. Now, this is actually an old sock that has been converted into a foraging toy where it has been stuffed with food items. I know a group that makes something called a sockatoo where they buy new socks. This is a recycled sock, you could say, but you can purchase new socks and stuff them with things for the birds to tear through. And you can see how the bird has ripped a hole in this sock to try and get that nut out. Now, if you have a bird who happens to really like to ingest fibrous material, this is not going to be appropriate for that individual. But for birds who don't have that tendency to ingest any sort of fibrous material, this could be a great different thing for them to interact with. This is just a paper tube that came from a gift wrapping. And so stuff was stuffed inside of there and the bird can tear it apart. There's these items that may be old things that we would be, throwing away or not, not being used anymore. We can turn them with a little bit of thought into something that a bird can now destroy and have a second life out of for a moment before the bird totally destroys it. Also with food presentation, I think it's important for us to remember to make things difficult for them to access. In the wild, you don't always have easy access to food items, so a little bit of difficulty isn't so bad. This particular toy has it's an old bottle that has a food item stuck inside of it, and then there's this cardboard box stuck over that, and the bird has to figure out how to get underneath that cardboard box, and they took a little bit of time to figure it out, but they eventually figured out, how do I get underneath that cardboard box to get to that bottle, to get to that food item. Up here in this photo, this is the little skewer that has food on it. It was dangling. The bird had to figure out how to pull that skewer up. And you can see the bird's using its mind of saying, okay, I'm going to eat this piece right now, but I really don't want to have to do all the work to get that second piece. So I'm going to hold on to this so I don't drop it again and I can eat the next one. So that takes a little bit of forward thinking, right, for this bird to want to do that behavior. Just a few more different things of foraging, of birds trying to get to food items, making things a little bit more difficult. These are two different tree stands, and they're held together by this little sort of ladder thing, and food was placed on one end, and the bird made the decision to climb from one end to the other to get that food. Of course, the bird could have flown from one end to the other to get to the food item, but this bird chose a different route, probably because it was just something different and fun and maybe challenging. I don't know what was going through the bird's mind with doing this, but it's providing something different, a different way for the bird to interact with its environment. Other thing I want to point out is geophagy. We know that there are a lot of birds out there that engage in geophagy. I'm sure most of us have seen pictures of or visited birds at clay licks before. And if you house your birds outside, and if it is safe, consider allowing access to the ground to be able to engage in this behavior. Now, this is something that has the potential to not be completely safe. It's not okay for every situation, but if we can make sure that there's no predators, no pesticides, no herbicides, no possible parasites in the environment, then this might be something that's good to do and allow the birds to do in the environment. So this takes a little bit more foresight and thought to see if this is appropriate in a situation for wherever these birds are housed. I'm just going to quickly go through the passerines, because really most of the stuff we talked about with the psittacines is going to really be the same thing for the passerines. When it comes to their caging and housing, the one thing that I want to point out, and I think it's important for all birds, but I really want to point it out for the passerines, for these tiny little guys, is I do think for them it is important for them to have the ability to fly. These little guys are a little bit more timid a lot compared to some of our bigger species. And so allowing these birds to be able to fly, having a big enough environment so that they can engage in that normal activity is huge for them. Do still think about the variety of perches, natural items for them to interact with, bathing options. I should have mentioned that as well with the psittacines. I forgot. But this bird down here, you can see he's bathing in his water dish. Having some bathing options for these birds is really important. This little finch here, she's looking at a cilantro branch that has been put into the environment for her. Just something different for her to interact with. Again, still think about toys. Even though a lot of the toys may be designed more for the larger species, these tiny little plastic pieces, for sure, little birds will interact with them because it's something for them to peck at and think about and investigate and interact with in different ways. Their food items, again, just like we talked about with the psittacines, having variety there. I really want to kind of show this next photo. This is a little dish that actually has some hay in it and also some flowers. And then there's like food items are actually mixed in between all of that stuff. So they're having to pick through the hay, they're having to pick through the flowers. This is something that they'd naturally be doing in the wild. So providing that in a captive situation is really, I think, helpful for them. Now, in just the last few minutes that I have here, we are going to transition over to thinking inside the box for a moment. And that's, of course, specifically talking about the nesting box. The nest box is important for welfare as well. You need to have the appropriate shape, the appropriate size, the appropriate location, the appropriate materials, and that is going to vary by species. I'm not going to get into that because there are resources available for that, but just a major difference that these two pictures are pointing out. Our little passerines, most of them are cup nesters. So a simple little cup like this that's been converted into a nest, that works okay. That is not going to work okay for a citizen bird. Most of our citizens are cavity nesters, and we have to have some sort of cavity for them to nest in. There are safety concerns with enrichment around little baby chicks. We need to make sure that there are no fibrous materials that they can swallow, and then also be cautious with heavy items so adults don't drop them on the chicks. This is a picture of a little Quaker baby. This is the nest box that it was in. The dad was just loved to put toys inside of the nesting box, but he would drop them in. And this little baby got hit on the head by one of the toys. So just be mindful of the individuals that are that are the parents, what their behaviors are that they like to do, to know of, is this something we need to maybe limit when they actively are having babies in the nest, that we make it so he can't drop things inappropriately on the baby and injure it in some way. Regarding the nesting material, it is important to provide appropriate nesting material because it allows for appropriate temperature control for the chicks, allows for appropriate materials for them to grasp onto. It can also help keep the babies away from their own feces. And we know if they don't have the appropriate type of bedding material, problems can happen. Chicks sometimes eat bedding material and get impactions. And then if they just have no bedding material, it could lead to a problem called splay leg, where their legs kind of splay out to the side because they didn't have anything to grasp onto, and that can cause some developmental abnormalities. And then just for a moment, back outside the box, once those chicks are able to come out of the nest, it's good to introduce them to a variety of enrichment items, everything we talked about, but introducing it gradually and safely to prepare them for their life out in the real world. So that is it for my talk. Are there any questions that I have in the last minute?
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Yes, we do have a couple questions. I think we have time for a couple. In regards to the outdoor enrichment with the netting protecting the birds, what are the concerns for avian influenza transmission?
Yeah, that is absolutely a great and pertinent question to ask. And it doesn't apply just to avian influenza, it's going to apply to other types of diseases that are out there as well. So there's going to be some regional differences, but we'll specifically talk about avian influenza since that was the question. We know that our water birds tend to be the ones who are carrying influenza as sort of our major species that are moving it around in the environment. It has been shown that it has gone to other species as well, even been identified in some of the smaller birds like our pigeons that are, ubiquitous and all around us. But because the water birds tend to be the biggest ones that are carrying it, if you have, I would make sure that if you want to do your housing outdoors, you are not having any sort of water access that wild birds can come to. If you are in an environment that's close to some sort of pond, if you know that you have ducks, geese, these water birds close by, maybe that's not going to be the right situation for you and your setup right now. But if you live in an environment where you don't have a lot of access to those or those types of birds around your environment, then it might be a little bit safer of an environment. And then, of course, depending upon wherever you happen to live, there might be other diseases that you need to keep in mind. And that's something that, you'll want to talk about with any, veterinary health professionals that are around you to know what is local and endemic to this location that I need to be aware of to see if it's appropriate for my birds to be able to be outside or not.
Okay, thanks, Stephanie. Next question. How does one clean and disinfect porous and natural items that are reused for enrichment / perching for birds in consideration of adhering to USDA regulations?
Oh, well, that's a very good and important question. There are certain like if we have a perch, for example, you can clean those in like a 1 to 9 bleach solution. You can even bake certain items too, is another way. Some disinfectants can be sprayed on top of porous items. You have to maybe then rinse them afterwards, dry them out appropriately, so birds aren't having any sort of contact with any of the like chemicals that you are going to be using. Now, of course, certain items you're just not going to be able to disinfect. So if we are using some like plant materials, well, those are only going to be like a one-time use thing, and then it's done and you are getting rid of it. You are not going to be reusing various items. But like perching, something that's meant to be more of a reuse item, 1 to 9 bleach solutions, soaking it, baking, or even just topical application if you have a really large item that you're not able to soak or put in any sort of like baking situation. Just really, really making sure after applying any sort of disinfectant, you are rinsing it really well, you are drying it really well before the birds have access to it again.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. I know we're over time. Stephanie, thank you very much for your presentation. If you put a question in the question box, I encourage you to answer or ask that question again when we get to the panel discussion. If not, we'll try and capture that and get that out there. But as always, you can reach out to Stephanie through Whova and ask your question directly.